I caught my mom lying about me to the whole family. I caught my mom lying about me to the whole family. I never thought my mom would be the one to hurt me. After all, she's my mom. She's supposed to protect me, right? But what I found out shocked me to my core. She lied about me to the whole family, twisting the truth in ways I never imagined. I thought it was all in my head at first, but once I started piecing things together, the reality hit me like a ton of bricks. I confronted her, but I wasn't prepared for what happened next. Here's the story of how my mom's lie tore through our family and how I had to face the truth in the most unexpected way. It started out innocently enough. I was having dinner with my family, just like any other Sunday night. The conversation flowed easily at first. Updates on work, school, casual catch-ups. But as soon as I mentioned something about a project I was working on, I noticed a strange shift in the air. My mom looked at me for a split second, her face stiff, before turning her attention to my cousin, who had asked me a question about it. At the time, I thought nothing of it. It wasn't unusual for her to get a little uncomfortable around certain topics, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As the night went on, I could tell something was brewing, whispers behind my back, the way everyone's attention shifted when I spoke. I wasn't sure if it was my imagination or if I had somehow offended someone, but I felt like I had become the subject of a silent conversation I wasn't privy to. The moment that truly set the alarm bells off was when my aunt, who had never been shy about her opinions, suddenly brought up a story about me. It was a story I had never told anyone in the family. A story about a rough patch I had gone through in my early 20s, something I had shared with my mom in confidence years ago. But the details that my aunt had shared were off. The way she described it wasn't the way I had experienced it. It was as though someone had taken my story and twisted it into something unrecognizable. I glanced at my mom, who was sitting there with a tight-lipped smile, not correcting anything. Her silence spoke volumes. My heart dropped as I realized that she had told this story to my aunt, and I started to wonder how much of what she said was true and how much of it was just a lie. I felt a knot form in my stomach. Could she have lied about me to others? Why would she do that? The next few days were a blur. My mind kept replaying that moment at dinner, the way my mom had been so oddly quiet when my aunt shared that version of the story. I kept asking myself over and over, why would she say those things? Was it just a misunderstanding? Or was there something more to it? I decided to do what I thought was the best thing. I tried to ask her about it. After a couple of days of letting it sit, I called my mom to have a conversation. I casually brought up the dinner and mentioned how strange it was that my aunt knew about that old story. "Oh, you know how she is," my mom replied dismissively. "She must have heard it from someone else." I nodded, not fully convinced, but trying to let it go. It didn't feel right, though. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that something wasn't adding up. Why hadn't my mom corrected her when she started telling the story in such a distorted way? Why hadn't she clarified the details, especially if they were inaccurate? A week later, my suspicions deepened. I had been hanging out with my cousin, the one who had been sitting next to my mom during the dinner, and something seemed odd in the way he was talking about me. He mentioned how I wasn't doing so well with a certain aspect of my life, something that wasn't true at all, or at least wasn't true in the way he had framed it. I immediately got a sinking feeling. Could it be that my mom had told him something that wasn't entirely true, just like she had told my aunt? I confronted my cousin, trying to keep the conversation casual, asking where he'd heard that about me. He hesitated for a second, then said, "Oh, my mom mentioned it. She said you were having a hard time with some stuff recently." My stomach dropped. So my mom had been telling the same story to multiple family members, but in a completely different light. My reality had been twisted, and I was now the subject of gossip based on a version of events that wasn't mine. I couldn't just sit back and let this continue. The anger had been building up inside me for days. I couldn't just let this slide anymore. My mom, my own mom, had been spreading lies about me, twisting the truth, and I wasn't going to sit back and let it continue. I knew I had to confront her. I called her that evening and asked if we could meet up. I could tell by her tone that she knew something was coming. She didn't ask why, just agreed with a quiet, "Sure." My nerves were all over the place. I had no idea what to expect from this conversation, but I knew it had to happen. We met at a coffee shop, the place where we had had so many heart-to-hearts in the past. As I walked up to the table, I saw her sitting there, looking calm, almost too calm. There was no sign of the nervousness I expected. Was she already prepared for this? I sat down across from her and took a deep breath. Mom, I need to talk to you about something that's been bothering me, I began, keeping my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. She looked at me, her expression unreadable. What's going on, honey? Why did you tell Aunt Linda and everyone else that story about me? I asked, leaning forward. The one from dinner? The one about my past that's not even true? Her face shifted just slightly, but I could see a flicker of guilt in her eyes. What are you talking about? You know that's not what I said. I wasn't going to let her dismiss me this time. Don't lie, Mom. I know exactly what you said, and I know it's not the truth. Why would you say that? Why would you twist my story and make me look like someone I'm not? There was a long pause. I could feel her struggling, trying to find a way to defend herself. She sighed and then finally said, I didn't think it would matter. It wasn't meant to hurt you. I blinked in disbelief. It did hurt me, Mom. It matters a lot. This is my life, my story. You can't just rewrite it for your convenience. Her eyes softened, but she didn't apologize. I just wanted them to understand that you've been through a lot. I didn't want them to think less of you. By lying about me, I couldn't hold back the frustration anymore. Why not just tell them the truth, Mom? Why not just be honest? She looked down at her coffee cup, her hands fidgeting with the cup. I thought it would make them feel more sympathetic. I didn't want them to judge you. I wanted to protect you, even if it meant bending the truth. My heart ached, but I wasn't going to let her off the hook. I don't need you to protect me by lying, Mom. I need you to respect me, to trust me to handle my own problems, and to stop making decisions behind my back. The silence between us stretched. I could tell that she was processing what I had said, but I didn't know if she fully understood. I never wanted to hurt you, she said quietly after a while. I just thought it would help. But it didn't, I replied firmly. It's only made things worse. I can't trust you if you keep doing this. Her expression faltered, and I saw the first real sign of regret. She had never apologized like this before, and it was hard to tell if she truly understood the gravity of what she had done. Do you understand why this is so hurtful? I asked, my voice calmer now, but still laced with disappointment. Why this feels like a betrayal? She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, I didn't think it through. I just wanted to protect you, but I can see now that I hurt you instead. I sat back, feeling the weight of the conversation. There was no immediate resolution. I didn't know if we could go back to how things were, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't just pretend everything was okay. I don't know if I can just forgive you right now, Mom. I need time, but you need to know how much this has shaken me. She nodded again, silent this time, and I could see that she was truly sorry. But the damage had been done. I had lost something that day, something irreplaceable. After the conversation with my mom, I thought I'd feel some sort of closure. Instead, I felt empty. The weight of what she had done hung over me like a cloud. She had admitted to lying, but words didn't feel like enough. I needed more than just an apology. I needed her to understand the full extent of how her actions had affected me. The lie wasn't just about a misunderstanding, it was about my integrity, my truth being distorted to fit her narrative. The days following the conversation were filled with silence. My mom and I barely spoke, and when we did, it was strained, like there was an invisible wall between us. I still loved her, but something had shifted. Every time I looked at her, all I could see was the betrayal. I started to withdraw from the family gatherings. I didn't want to deal with the awkwardness of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I also realized that I needed space to heal, to figure out what kind of relationship I wanted with my mom moving forward. I remember one night, about a week later, when my phone buzzed with a message from my cousin. He had been the one to mention the distorted version of the story at dinner, and I was hesitant to open the message. I feared it was more gossip or questions about what was going on between me and my mom. But when I read it, my heart sank. Hey, I've been hearing some stuff about you. I just wanted to check in and make sure you're okay. Is everything all right? It was as if the whole family had started to notice the tension, and I couldn't escape it. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to drag anyone else into this, but at the same time, I didn't want to keep pretending. I didn't want to lie. I decided to talk to my cousin honestly. I told him about the lie my mom had spread and how it had affected me. It wasn't easy to open up like that, but I needed to explain myself, especially since so many people had heard the version of events that wasn't true. After a long pause, my cousin responded, I had no idea. I'm really sorry. I had no idea things were this bad. You know I'm here for you, right? That was all I needed. I wasn't alone in this. As painful as it was, I was starting to realize that I didn't need to carry the weight of my mom's actions on my own. I had support from others who cared about me, and that helped me start to heal. It took time, but slowly I started feeling like myself again. It wasn't a smooth journey. There were moments when I would randomly think about what happened, and the anger or hurt would resurface. But I started to realize that healing wasn't just about moving on. It was about processing the emotions and allowing myself to feel them without letting them control me. I began spending more time with friends who truly had my back, people who supported me without judgment. We spent weekends hanging out, doing things I loved, and it was like I could finally breathe again. My friends gave me the space to talk about what I was going through without feeling pressured to forgive or get over it right away. They just listened, and that meant everything. Through this process, I also came to terms with the fact that some things might never go back to how they were. I could forgive my mom, but that didn't mean everything would go back to normal. I had to be okay with that. I had to accept that. Sometimes relationships evolve in ways we can't predict or control. One afternoon, a few weeks after the conversation with my mom, I decided to reach out to her. It wasn't easy, but I knew it was the right thing to do if I ever wanted to move forward. I sent her a simple message. I think we need to talk more. I'm not ready to forgive, but I want to at least have a conversation about where we go from here. Her response was quick. I'm here whenever you're ready. I love you and want to make things right. I felt a knot in my stomach as I read it, but I also felt a sense of relief. Maybe this wasn't the end of our relationship. Maybe there was still a chance for us to rebuild, even if it wouldn't be the same as before. I called her later that day. We had a long, difficult conversation about everything that had happened. She apologized again, and this time, it felt more genuine. She acknowledged that her actions had hurt me deeply. And while she didn't fully understand the extent of it, she was willing to listen. That conversation didn't fix everything, but it was a start. We didn't have all the answers, and the trust we once had was gone. But we were talking, and that was more than I could have hoped for at that point. The weeks that followed were a delicate balance of rebuilding and navigating the pain. I didn't expect things to go back to how they were overnight, and I knew it would take time. But after that conversation with my mom, I felt a small sense of hope. It was clear that she genuinely wanted to make things right, and I was beginning to realize that I didn't have to rush my healing process. We kept in touch more regularly, but our conversations were different. They weren't as easy as they once were. There were still awkward silences, and at times I'd feel that familiar weight of betrayal creep up again. But I also started to notice something new, a level of honesty between us that had never existed before. My mom was more open about her feelings, her struggles, and her past. And while that didn't erase the hurt, it helped me see her as more human rather than just the mother I had built up in my mind. She admitted that she had made a mistake, and while she didn't excuse her actions, she expressed how much it had impacted her to see the distance growing between us. For the first time, I realized that my mom was not perfect. She was just trying to do the best she could with the tools she had, even if they weren't always the right ones. I didn't have to forgive her right away, but I could begin to understand her, and that was a step forward. At the same time, I made a conscious decision to forgive myself. For a while, I had blamed myself for not seeing the signs sooner, for letting the situation fester. But I realized that I had done nothing wrong. I had trusted her, and that was never a fault. The betrayal wasn't on me. It was on her. It was hard to let go of that guilt, but it felt like a weight lifting off my chest once I did. I found myself becoming stronger, not just in my relationship with my mom, but in how I approach life in general. The experience had opened my eyes to the importance of setting boundaries, of not letting anyone, even family, cross lines that made me uncomfortable. It was a valuable lesson, and although it was painful, I was grateful for the clarity it brought. As the months went by, I realized that I had learned a lot from the entire ordeal. There was a sense of closure, though not in the way I expected. I didn't have to fully forgive my mom right away, and I didn't have to go back to the way things were. Instead, I accepted the relationship for what it was now. We were two people who had been through something difficult, and while it wasn't perfect, it was real. Over time, our relationship began to evolve. It wasn't as close as it once was, but there was a new kind of respect between us. My mom and I started talking more openly, and our conversations felt more honest. She no longer made decisions for me or tried to shield me from uncomfortable truths. In turn, I no longer felt the need to keep my distance or hold on to past grudges. It wasn't all easy, though. There were still moments of tension, awkward silences when the past threatened to resurface, old habits of avoiding difficult topics. But with each passing day, we were learning how to navigate those moments. Slowly, I realized that it wasn't about going back to how things were. It was about moving forward and finding a new way to relate to one another. I also started reflecting more on my own growth. The betrayal, as painful as it was, had been a catalyst for change in my life. I had learned to trust myself, to set boundaries, and to prioritize my own well-being. It wasn't just about my mom anymore. It was about me taking control of my own story. The pain of what had happened with Kate and the betrayal of my mom was still there, but it no longer defined me. I learned to appreciate the relationships that truly supported me, the ones where honesty and respect were mutual. I realized how important it was to have people in my life who didn't just tell me what I wanted to hear, but who also had the courage to be real with me. As I moved forward, I knew that I wasn't the same person I was before the betrayal. But that wasn't a bad thing. I was stronger, more self-aware, and better equipped to handle whatever came next. A few months after our last difficult conversation, something unexpected happened. I received a call from my mom one evening, and the moment I saw her name on my phone, my heart skipped a beat. I hadn't expected to hear from her so soon, and the weight of everything that had happened hung between us like an unspoken truth. But this time, I didn't hesitate to answer. "Hey, I've been thinking about something," she said, her voice unusually soft. "Can we meet? I think I owe you more than just an apology. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I want to make things right, but I don't know if that's even possible." I didn't know what to expect, but I agreed. The truth was, despite everything, I still cared about my mom. The bond we had, though damaged, was something I wasn't ready to give up entirely. I had been processing my feelings, and though I wasn't sure what this conversation would lead to, I was willing to listen. We met at the same coffee shop where we had talked before. This time, I was more prepared for whatever she might say. My guard was still up, but I was ready to hear her out. When I sat down, I noticed she looked different, vulnerable almost. She wasn't trying to hide behind her usual confident persona. There was an honesty in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "I've been thinking about our last conversation and about how much I hurt you," she began. "I've spent so many years trying to protect you in my own way, but I see now that I was suffocating you. I was selfish, and I didn't consider how my actions would affect you." I was taken aback. I had expected the usual excuses, the same old justifications, but this was different. She was truly reflecting on her behavior. "I never meant to hurt you," she continued, "but I see that I have, and I'm so sorry for that. I should have trusted you more. I should have respected you more." I let her words sink in. It was the first time she had ever taken full responsibility for the pain she caused. I didn't immediately say anything. I needed time to process. For so long, I had been the one holding all the anger and frustration, and now, for the first time, I felt like she was meeting me halfway. "I don't know if I can just go back to the way things were," I said, finally speaking. "It's not that I don't want to forgive you, but I can't just forget what happened. It still hurts." "I understand," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't expect things to go back to normal right away, but I want to do better, for you, for me. I've been thinking about how to show you that I'm serious about making things right." It wasn't the perfect resolution. It wasn't a fairy tale ending where everything magically healed in one conversation. But it was progress. For the first time in a long time, I felt like my mom was truly listening. She was offering me the space to heal on my own terms. And that made all the difference. Over the next few weeks, things between my mom and me began to evolve. But it was a slow process. We didn't try to rush anything. Instead, we focused on small steps. We didn't talk about everything at once, and we didn't try to pretend that everything was magically healed. But we made progress, one conversation at a time. The first change came in the form of respect. She started asking about my life more, listening without judgment, and supporting the decisions I was making. She stopped trying to control my choices and let me navigate my own path, even if she didn't always agree with them. I could tell it wasn't easy for her, but she was trying, and that effort meant more than I ever could have imagined. One night, a few weeks after our conversation at the coffee shop, she invited me to dinner. It was a quiet evening, just the two of us. We talked about everything and nothing at all: work, life, the little things. It was a conversation we hadn't had in ages, and it felt like a breath of fresh air. As we ate, she looked at me with a softness in her eyes. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about trusting you, and I've come to realize that I've always seen you as my little girl, but you've grown into someone I'm really proud of. I need to let you make your own mistakes, your own choices, and just be here to support you." Her words caught me off guard. It was the first time she had truly seen me as an adult, not just her child. It felt like a huge milestone in our relationship. For the first time in a long while, I felt like she was seeing me as an equal, as someone worthy of her trust and respect. That night, I went home feeling lighter than I had in a long time. I knew the road to full healing wasn't going to be easy, and I knew there would be bumps along the way. But I had also learned that sometimes the process of rebuilding takes time. It's not about rushing to forgiveness. It's about learning to heal at your own pace and finding new ways to trust, even when things are broken. As the weeks went by, I realized something important. I didn't need to go back to the way things were. The old version of our relationship, the one that was built on unspoken expectations and assumptions, was gone. And in its place, something new was taking shape, something more honest, more grounded, and, for the first time, something that was based on mutual respect. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when old patterns crept in. I would sometimes feel that familiar discomfort when she'd offer advice I hadn't asked for, or when she'd try to control the situation without realizing it. But now, I could voice my concerns without fear. I wasn't afraid to set boundaries and speak up when I felt like my autonomy was being compromised. Our conversations became more real. We didn't hide behind pleasantries or avoid difficult topics anymore. I began to see my mom in a new light, not as the person who was perfect and never made mistakes, but as someone who had her flaws and was doing her best. That didn't mean I had to tolerate everything she did, but it allowed me to see her humanity in a way I hadn't before. One of the most significant moments came during a family gathering. I was talking to my cousin again, this time with no bitterness or awkwardness in my voice. The conversation was lighthearted, but then he brought up the topic of my mom. He mentioned how he noticed the changes in our relationship and said, "You know, I can tell your mom is trying really hard. She's not perfect, but it's clear she's been putting in the effort." I didn't realize until that moment how much I had started to appreciate her efforts. For so long, I had resented her actions, but now I could see the steps she was taking to rebuild trust. It wasn't easy for her either, and I had to respect that. I also realized that forgiveness wasn't a one-time thing. It was a process, and it wasn't something I had to rush. The pain of betrayal wasn't something that could just vanish overnight. But with each passing day, I was learning to let go of the anger that had weighed me down. Forgiveness was more about my own peace than it was about my mom's actions. I didn't want to carry the burden of resentment anymore. It was exhausting. By the time the next family event rolled around, I was genuinely excited to see everyone. My relationship with my mom was far from perfect, but it was moving in the right direction. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my own narrative. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone, least of all to my mom. In the end, I learned that healing doesn't always happen in a straight line. It's messy, complicated, and sometimes painful, but it's also incredibly rewarding. What started as a betrayal turned into an opportunity for growth, for both me and my mom. Our relationship may never be the same, but that doesn't mean it's any less valuable. It's different now, and that's okay. Looking back, I realized that this experience was a catalyst for change in so many ways. It taught me the importance of setting boundaries, of speaking up when things aren't right, and of not allowing anyone, no matter how close, to manipulate my story. Most importantly, it taught me that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and healing doesn't mean going back to the way things were. It's about creating something new, something better. Have you ever had to deal with a betrayal from someone close to you? How did you handle it? Did you find it hard to trust again? I'd love to hear your experiences and thoughts. Let's talk about it in the comments below, whether you've gone through something similar or just have advice for others who might be in a similar situation. If you found this story helpful, or if you think it might resonate with someone you know, don't forget to like and share it. And if you're new here, consider subscribing for more stories about overcoming challenges and navigating the complexities of life.